If you've ever played a Japanese role-playing game, you've probably heard something like this before, many, many times. Battle themes like this are an integral part of the musical landscape of the Japanese role-playing game, or jRPG, and players will typically hear them reused hundreds of times throughout the course of a typical playthrough. Anyone with enough perseverance to see their journey through to the end, though, will likely hear a different theme during the final battle against their ultimate adversary. One that carries with it a dramatic weight fitting for a battle over the fate of the world. But what is it about the music for these final encounters that creates this sense of gravitas that is generally absent from battle music against ordinary foes? Recent scholarship concerning the battle music of jRPGs has contributed useful insights on a number of individual soundtracks. I've listed a few recent works here. There has also been broader theorizing on a few fronts, for instance, Julian Grasso's discussion of how jRPG music mediates time and narrative. William Gibbons has noted that jRPG composers musically articulate a spectrum between danger and safety across different types of musical cues, the music for towns, dungeons, battles, and so on, and Gregory Rossetti has outlined some common properties of battle music in general. My aim here today is to show how jRPG battle themes indicate their own spectrum of danger by aurally distinguishing between fights with ordinary enemies and special encounters with tougher foes or bosses at key moments in the game. Using a corpus of 125 RPG soundtracks written between 1986 and the present day, I will demonstrate how composers differentiate between regular jRPG battle themes and boss fights through the use of marked musical characteristics associated primarily with the latter. I will begin with a brief summary of the features of jRPG battle music in general. Then, I will discuss several ways in which boss themes may be marked as distinctive from standard battle music. The length of introductory passages, differences in tempo, special harmonic paradigms, and changes in orchestration relative to a prior battle theme. Before we begin, though, a few notes about the corpus. First, most of the games analyzed here are turn-based RPGs in which player characters are controlled by selecting options from a menu. Action RPGs in which the player character is controlled directly often play by different rules, with combat typically taking place against the backdrop of exploration music rather than on a separate screen with a distinct battle theme. Since the whole point of the study is to show how boss music is different from regular battle music, I only included a handful of action RPGs in which regular battles had their own music and were separate from exploration segments. Second, the distribution of the list is weighted slightly towards older RPGs, thinning out a little beginning in 2010, partly due to a mainstream shift in recent years away from turn-based RPGs and towards action RPGs. Finally, in instances where a game was released in multiple versions, I've analyzed the soundtrack for only the earliest version. Standard battle themes for jRPGs tend to have a certain set of characteristics that distinguish them from the music of towns, dungeons, and other gameplay contexts. The vast majority of the time, they are in 4/4 and in a minor or alien mode with a relatively fast tempo, usually between 140 and 180 beats per minute, but sometimes a bit faster or slower. They also tend to feature exact or near-exact repetition of small segments, usually 1 to 4 measures in length, at a higher rate than town or field music. Dungeon music is sometimes similarly repetitive, but it is usually at a distinctively slower tempo. Regular battle music may also be preceded by a short introduction of 1 or 2 measures. The battle music for Dragon Quest III, written by Koichi Sugiyama, is a typical example. During the 1990s, it became common for battle music to take on a rock aesthetic, with a drum set, often accompanied by bass guitar, furnishing a rhythmic foundation. The instrumentation as a whole would often resemble that of a rock ensemble. Or orchestral instruments might be layered on top. This hybrid instrumentation is still in use today, as evidenced by the battle music for Bravely Default 2, which just came out in February of this year. While there are soundtracks that depart from this template, these features form the baseline expectation exhibited by the majority of battle themes in this corpus. Now that we have a general sense of what regular battle themes tend to sound like, let's see how they compare to boss themes. As mentioned before, regular battle themes often begin with a very brief introduction. We've heard this in all of our examples so far. For boss themes, the introduction, if it has one, will often be significantly longer than for the regular battle theme from the same game. The reverse is far less common. The regular battle theme for Konami's Lagrange point begins with an upward sweep prior to the start of the theme proper. The theme used for most boss fights, on the other hand, begins with an 8-measure introduction that takes about 12 seconds to unfold. We'll hear the beginning of the regular theme first. And now we'll hear the beginning of the boss theme. This practice of lengthening introductions for important battles can be found as early as 1988 in the final boss themes for Dragon Quest III and Final Fantasy II. As in Lagrange point, the introductions of those themes last about 12 or 13 seconds. By contrast, regular battle themes rarely have an introduction of longer than 4 measures, and most last for only a few seconds. I've only found a handful of exceptions to this, the largest share of them by Kenji Ito, who tends to favor long introductions across all battle theme types. During the 1990s, as boss battle themes started getting longer, the introductions sometimes followed suit. Nobuo Uematsu was particularly inclined to stretch out the openings of music for major bosses. I've listed several examples here. The introduction for The Extreme, the final boss theme for Final Fantasy VIII, is especially noteworthy for being over 1.5 minutes long, longer than many battle themes in their entirety. But I'll forgo playing it right now because, well, we've got other bullet points to get to. Tempo is another means by which composers distinguish boss music from regular battle music. Battle themes in general often tend towards the fast side. Slower themes, when they come up, are usually assigned to boss fights, especially the final battle or series of battles. For instance, in Phantasy Star 4, the theme for the first part of the final boss fight clocks in at around 100 beats a minute, about a third slower than the game's standard battle theme. Although it's also possible to feel this in a very slow 2 at about 50 beats a minute. In fact, battle themes below a certain tempo threshold are practically guaranteed to be boss music. I ran each battle theme from this corpus through a BPM analyzer in order to determine its tempo, checking the results by hand to make sure there were no drastic deviations. Then, I assigned each theme a label of regular, boss, or final boss based on the battle's function, or, in some cases, a label of special for battle themes that didn't fit these categories, like the random encounters with chocobos in Final Fantasy VII. The following chart shows the themes organized by release year on the x-axis, with the y-axis showing tempo. For space considerations, I've only shown data through the year 2000. Battle themes slower than 120 beats per minute are almost all themes for bosses. There are only 4 exceptions to this prior to the year 2000. One is the regular battle theme from Grandia, and another is from a late-game area in Legend of Dragoon. The other 2 are from the same game, Earthbound, or Mother 2 as it was originally known in Japan. Most of the exceptions after the year 2000 come from its sequel, Mother 3. Earthbound's battle themes, however, are quite different in style from pretty much everything we've heard so far. For example, here's the track Battle Against a Weird Opponent, which first shows up during fights with some common enemies early in the game. Granted, this is the same game that pits you against New Age retro hippies at one point, so perhaps departure from jRPG conventions is par for the course. In some cases, only the intro of a battle theme will be slower. This is more or less a guarantee that the theme is for a boss fight. The final boss music of Digital Devil Story, Megami Tensei, begins with a slower introduction and compound meter before launching into the main body of the theme. Composers may also use harmony to distinguish boss themes from regular battle music, but things get a little more slippery here. Speaking broadly, boss music is more likely to be dissonant or prone to modulation than regular battle music, which tends to be more tonally stable. This is true for most of Koichi Sugiyama's compositions for the Dragon Quest series. Here's an excerpt from the regular battle theme from Dragon Quest VIII. And here's the music for the boss fight against Dulmagus, the primary antagonist for the first half of the game. However, battle themes from the 1980s often tend to be quite dissonant regardless of their function. Consider, for instance, Junji Kuma's regular battle music for Jaseiken Necromancer. As Aaron Price noted in a paper at this conference in 2020, composer Motoi Sakuraba will sometimes rapidly shift between tonal centers, even in his regular battle themes. The standard combat music for Eternal Sonata is a particularly striking example. Speaking about chromaticism in a broad sense, then, may be of limited utility in distinguishing boss themes from regular battle themes, although discussion of specific harmonic paradigms may prove more fruitful. A number of boss themes will begin a section with a prominent 5⁻⁴ melodic line over a tonic pedal. 5⁻⁴ may be either repeated or answered by another pair of scale degrees, still over a tonic pedal. Dyed in Scarlet, one of the boss themes for Etrian Odyssey, opens with a melodic line 5⁻⁴ 4⁻⁴, harmonized by 1, major 2, flat major 2, 1 over a tonic pedal. This is followed by a modified repeat in which another voice crosses above the original melodic line. A much earlier example of this can be found in the 1987 Famicom title Tojin Makyoden Herakuresu no Eiko, although the harmonization of scale degree 4 is different here. There are a number of variants of this schema that I don't have time to cover in depth, but I've listed several examples here for reference. Another harmonic phenomenon often found in boss fights is an exact or near-exact repetition of an immediately preceding musical segment transposed to a different pitch level. In Yasunori Mitsuda's boss music for Chrono Trigger, the main body of the track begins with a 4-measure segment, followed by a near-exact repetition, and then a repetition of the whole thing up a minor third. Let's listen. Yoko Shimomura does the same thing in one of the boss themes for Super Mario RPG. A later passage in this track uses another exact transposed repetition, but down a major second. I've listed several more examples of this phenomenon here. One thing to keep in mind though, exact transposed repetitions like this do sometimes show up in regular battle themes. If a transposition is up by perfect fourth or is part of a common practice harmonic sequence, it's not a surefire indicator of the theme's function. However, if the original musical block prolongs a single harmony and the transposition is by a second or third, it's probably from a boss theme. The last parameter I'll be discussing today is orchestration. As I mentioned earlier, jRPG battle themes often combine rock and orchestral instruments, with the drum set providing the rhythmic foundation. Composers who follow this template for regular battle themes will sometimes shift their instrumentation in boss themes, replacing the drum set with orchestral percussion, like timpani or snare drum. This is almost always an indication of a boss fight, especially for pivotal battles later in the game. The earliest example I know of this is from the 1992 Sega CD title, Lunar, the Silver Star. Here's the regular battle music with its more rock-based aesthetic. And here's the boss music, which employs timpani, snare, crash cymbals, and xylophone. Here's another comparison from Etrian Odyssey 4. First, the start of the regular battle theme. And now, an excerpt from the final boss theme, which shifts so hard in the orchestral direction that it sounds like it's from a completely different game. The use of tubular bells, as heard in the last example, also occurs in a number of boss themes, especially from late in the game. In titles from the 1990s, tubular bells are almost a sure sign of a boss fight. Only one title in this corpus from that decade, Final Fantasy VIII, uses them in a theme written specifically for regular battles. In the 2000s, though, this is a less reliable indicator of a boss fight, as exceptions to this trend started becoming more common. To give some extra oomph to a late-game boss theme, a composer may supplement an orchestral texture with a choir, possibly singing in Latin. One-Winged Angel, the final boss theme for Final Fantasy VII, was an early example of this. Using a number of fragments from the medieval collection Carmina Burana, all of which had also been used in Karl Orff's work by the same name, Uematsu set a precedent that would carry forward not only in RPGs, but in numerous other game genres. As we've seen, composers of jRPG soundtracks articulate the role of their battle themes, either for regular battles or for boss encounters, via the length of introductory passages, differences in tempo, special harmonic paradigms, and particular choices of orchestration. I suspect that the sense of late-game gravitas communicated by some of these features may also be present in other theme types, and in future research I plan to explore whether or not that is indeed the case. In the meantime, though, thank you for watching, and I look forward to your questions.